Curatorian, and I am a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and am working to manage this online learning series. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of really quick housekeeping details with you. First of all, I'd encourage you to introduce yourself. Let us know your name, organization, and the name of the GLR coalition that you're a part of, if you're a member of a GLR coalition, using the chat box on your Zoom screen. Also wanted to share that all webinar participants or all webinar attendees will be participating in listen-only mode today during the presentations, and that's to avoid any background noises or distractions. But we do strongly encourage your active engagement throughout the conversation, and so I'd encourage you to share any thoughts or reflections that come to you during the presentations using the chat box on your Zoom screen, and to share any questions that you would like to pose or ask of our presenters using the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. And for those of you who've been joining in for these conversations for a while, this is a little bit new. Previously, we would have you pose your questions in the chat box, but look for the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. It makes it much easier for us to track those questions and make sure that we can share them with the presenters when we move into Q&A. Third, just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and that a link to that recording will be sent to all who registered for today's conversation in an email that will go out later this week, which will also include a link to the slides as well as any resources that are shared during today's conversation. So keep an eye out for that later this week. And then finally, just wanted to give you a heads up that we will be posting a very brief survey poll after the presentations are complete and during the Q&A portion of the webinar, and would really encourage you to take just a couple of quick moments to share your thoughts and feedback with us in that poll. It really helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement and making sure that these conversations are relevant to your work and meeting your needs. I'd also invite you, if you have any additional thoughts or feedback suggestions for future conversations, feel free to reach out to me via email and share those thoughts with me. Love to incorporate them in future conversations. Now I'd like to share just a little bit of background about the GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar series. As you can see on the screen in front of you, we've got a number of great sessions planned for the coming weeks as a part of our Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series that's going on through the month of June. We've got one every Tuesday, always starting, or each one starting at 3 p.m. Eastern time, as well as occasionally we'll have some special webinars that start earlier in the day. And we're hoping that this predictable and reliable schedule will make it easier for you and for others to make plans to join in for these conversations on a regular basis. We've now hosted more than 35 webinars since the launch of GLR Learning Tuesdays last September. So I'd also encourage you to check out CLIP. That's the campaign's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, where you can find the growing archive of resources that have been generated through these conversations, exploring the best science, programs, and ideas related to the work to ensure early school success for more children from low-income families. And having hosted so many webinars since the launch last fall, that archive on CLIP was becoming a little bit overwhelming and difficult to find what you were looking for in it. So if you felt that way, I'd encourage you to go back, check it out again, because I'm so incredibly excited to announce and share that we've done a reorganization of CLIP, so that now there is a folder for each of the webinars that we've hosted where you can find everything from that conversation, the recording, the slides, presenter bios, a summary, and links that were shared. So I'd encourage you to go back and check that out if you'd had a little bit of frustration like I have in the past. And if you're unfamiliar with CLIP, I just wanted to point out that I did share a link to the Community Learning for Impact Improvement platform in the chat box. So you can use that to find CLIP and join, and so that you can access those resources. But now for today's conversation. Last week we launched the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series, lifting up the issue of learning loss to acknowledge and confront the very real threat presented by the COVID slide. Today we're going to continue that conversation as we explore analysis to really get our hands around and understand the potential learning loss that could come from these extended school closures, and discuss how strategies that are used to address summer learning loss can and are being applied to support students and their families this summer as they prepare to return to school in the fall and also in the coming summer. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to introduce our rock star panel of presenters and commentators for today's conversation. First, we have Jennifer McCombs. Dr. Jennifer McCombs is a senior policy researcher with the RAND Corporation and the director of the Behavioral and Policy Sciences Department there. Jennifer's research focuses on evaluating the extent to which public policies and programs improve outcomes for at-risk children and youth. She is a frequent advisor on summer and after school and has served on the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Committee on Summertime Experiences and Child and Adolescent Education, Health, and Safety. So welcome, Jennifer. We also have Chris Minnich with us today. Chris Minnich is the Chief Executive Officer of NWEA, where he focuses on helping teachers use assessment data to ensure all students in the public education system, regardless of background, graduate prepared for college, careers, and life. His experience includes working with states to upgrade their standards and assessment, transform educator preparation programs, design new approaches to teaching and learning, and implement and sustain promising reforms across the country. So welcome, Chris Minnich. We also have another Chris joining us today, Chris Smith, who is the Executive Director of Boston After School and Beyond. Under his leadership, Boston After School and Beyond has developed a nationally recognized model of summer learning that has been shown to improve student outcomes. Like Jennifer, he has served on the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's committee exploring how summertime experiences can promote the healthy development and well-being of children and youth. So welcome, Chris Smith. And then finally, we have David Moore, who will be joining us as a community commentator. Dr. David Moore serves as the superintendent of schools in Indian River County, Florida, and he previously served as assistant superintendent in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, where he led the Division of Academic Support, which encompasses the Education Transformation Office, Student Services, and the Office of School Improvement. So welcome, David, and welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your day to share your work and insights with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading Network. Chris Minnich, I'd like to start with you first, if we could. I know that NWEA just released a powerful report in April that underscores the challenge before all of us who care about improving outcomes for children. Can you tell us a little bit about that report, the analysis used, and the projections that the analysis revealed in terms of the potential impact of COVID-19 school closures on children's success in reading and in math?
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for the opportunity to join today. And I would just say up front that we did this research before the additional trauma that our Black students are probably receiving at this moment. It's actually probably trauma beyond just the Black community, but especially focused in the Black community. And so I want to just acknowledge up front that we're with our Black students, and we need to make sure that in this moment we're talking about learning loss. But before you can get to learning loss, people have to be okay and have to be able to engage. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that. And Sarah, I appreciate you doing that at the beginning of the conversation. So if I could just talk a little bit about what we did here. So we're a nonprofit organization that assesses about 12 million students across the United States and the world about their progress in reading, math, and science learning. And we took 5 million of those cases from the year 17-18. So we took 5 million real student data between grades 3 through 8. And then we looked at the type of loss they had over the summer. And we then projected that back to a March 15th date of closure. And if you can show the next slide here, we'll be able to talk a little bit about what the trajectories were. So you'll see on this graph that since we would normally have seen learning loss take place starting in June through September, we then back mapped that to an earlier school closure date. Now, granted, there's a lot of caveats here because frankly, some districts have done a pretty good job of getting learning to students. Others have done less. So that's why we have two dotted lines on this graph here. The first one being a flat dotted line, straight across, which is the trajectory of students just stayed where they were by the time school closure was finished, which would have been March 15th. The lighter dotted line on this graph is the trajectory as if they took the summer slide trajectory, meaning in reading, we see about a half grade level of loss in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade area if summer slide happens for the full 6 months that the students are away from school. You'll notice the trends are mitigated a little bit at the higher grades, and we think that's due to the fact that more growth is taking place at the earlier grades. But that doesn't mean that we won't see that type of slide at the upper grades as well. I would just add that these are averages. So while you could see these types of trajectories, particularly for students who have less engaged school systems or they are less engaged with the school system, I think you'll see more drastic slides than maybe even projected here. So we wanted to do this to make sure people understood that it's not our destiny that these types of losses happen. That between now and September, we can work really hard with school districts to make sure that the slide doesn't take place. And, you know, we're partnered with almost 10,000 school districts in the country, and we're talking to as many superintendents as possible about, okay, how do we help you in the summer? How do we help you as part of back to school? Because man, it is a big task to get students back on track after being possibly away for 6 months of academic learning. So again, this is in reading. I'd like to show you the chart in math because it's a bit more drastic. So if we go forward, you'll notice in the early grades in mathematics, you'll see almost a full grade level of drop if you look at the lighter drop off, the lighter dotted line there. So the 4th grader gets down almost to below a 3rd grade level of expectations in terms of their growth. It's such an interesting dynamic that grades 3, 4, and 5 in mathematics are the ones that are that we're so really focused on, because we think the greatest drop will happen in those grades because of the type of mathematics learning that is going on in those areas. And I recognize I'm speaking to the campaign for grade level reading, so I do understand that that may not be the total area of focus here, but the amount of drop that we saw in mathematics is really important to highlight. The last thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the differential impact that it might have. So we took a look at the top 75th percentile of performers, and we took a look at the 50th percentile performers, and then the 25th percentile performers. And then we mapped that out based on 4th and 6th grade here in reading. So you'll notice the drop is much more drastic at the bottom quartile than it is at the top quartile. So if you are performing somewhere near the 75th percentile, in most cases, your growth over the summer either flattens or continues to go up because you have access to either materials at home or your continuing instruction. You'll notice at the 50th percentile, the slide down is a little bit, but not quite as drastic. And then at the 25th percentile, you're below 4th grade levels in terms of a 6th grader who is reading, who was reading on grade level. And so our concern in this moment is not to sort of raise up a panic. What we want to say to the community is, this research is out there. It's just the facts about what has happened in the past projected onto this situation. Now, this situation is very different than anything we've experienced. So I think there is hope that we can make sure that kids don't fall off like this. But I wanted to prepare the educators on this call, and the reason why we published this research is to prepare folks that in the fall, we're going to have very widely different performance levels than maybe we've had in the past. Obviously, anyone who's been in education knows that when you come back from summer, you already have a difference in performance levels. But I think this research shows us how broad those differences could be. So, I would just point to this graph right here to say a 4th grader at the 75th percentile of performance is probably going to continue on in reading and be pretty much okay. But that still leaves about half of our kids that are going to go down. If you look at the 50th percentile line there, that's about half of the kids in the country are going to be below level when they restart, if these projections are accurate. And so the preparation that we need to do between now and then is really essential to make sure that we start well next year. And later in the webinar, I'll talk a little bit about what we can do and what we've been hearing from districts about what they'll do to make sure that some of these drops don't happen. So Sarah, thanks for the time to share, and I look forward to the conversation.
thanks. So, wow, students returning to school in the fall with just 70% of learning gains from a typical school year and less than 50% of the learning gains in some grades. That is incredibly concerning and distressing projections. But I understand you're saying these are projections, they are not destiny. So how do we prevent this? What can policymakers, educators, families, researchers, the local funders and partners on the call with us today do to prevent these projections from coming to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, and on the next slide, we do have some recommendations that I will talk through. But what we're seeing, the key to this is teachers. Teachers are the ones that prevent this slide, right? So the reason why we have summer slide is that students aren't engaged with their teachers over the summer. And in many cases, I was talking to a large district the other day. They said they still had had challenges getting to about 10% of their students, meaning they weren't actually having academic conversations with 10% of their students or being able to even reach them. So there are a set of students that we have to figure out ways to make up instructional time. We have to figure out ways, whether it be over the summer, whether it be as we go back to school, if we think about different staffing strategies to give us more time with students. Those are the types of things that districts are telling us they want to do. And frankly, it's a hard thing because we are in an economic time where many of them are being asked to cut resources. At the same time, the biggest gaps might exist for our learners. And so the key to making sure that this loss doesn't become reality is how do we make sure teachers have more instructional time with students? So that's bullet 2 on this list. I think districts as a whole need to plan differently for next year. And we have a superintendent that would comment on this better than I can because he's in the middle of it. But, and I really look forward to hearing what he has to say about this. But thinking about the restart as not a typical start to a school year. I was talking to one district that talked a little bit about having many more instructors at the beginning of next school year. And again, that's a financial question, but they were gonna bring in substitutes at the same time they were gonna have their regular set of teachers in order to try to break down and figure out where students are and get them back on level as much as possible. A couple other bullets that I would just reference. We need to surround kids with learning outside the classroom as well. This is how you could engage community partners in this. Many of the people on this call probably are really good resources for making sure we're engaging students outside of school as well. And then thinking about restart plans. We've talked about those plans briefly on the academic side, but we're also going to have to attend to students' social emotional needs as they're coming back. They may not be ready to learn yet. So how do we make sure that we get them back into the swing of things in a way that is tied to the academics and doesn't allow us to sort of leave these kids behind for 2 to 3 years? That's what I'm worried the most about, is that we've got, one of the big pushes in the campaign for grade level reading was that all students can do this stuff. And that was such an important tenet of this conversation. That still has to be what we're saying. But it also needs to acknowledge that we're going to have a wider variety of performance coming back to school next year than we probably ever have. So I'll stop there, and I'm excited to talk about this more. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. Well, Chris, before I let you go, I have one more question for you. In terms of, so this spring, the shift to online learning happened incredibly rapidly, just a couple of days in many districts, if that even. And thinking about the next school year, right now we've got more time to plan. We've got a couple of months before most children are going back to school. So what can we do right now to prepare to support these? Because you were getting into it a little bit just there. Who've missed out on a lot of content and learning, and also to prepare in case there are future closures as we start the next school year. So what do you think school districts and their community partners should be doing and thinking right now as they're preparing for the next school year?
Well, look, at the earlier grades, our research shows that this will be particularly difficult. So I think elementary students need a specific plan around what types of things are we going to reteach, what types of things are we going to just pick up at different points during the year. especially in mathematics, it matters a lot that in the early grades we build on things. So a third grader who might have missed parts of a whole, for example, in fractions, is really going to struggle in fourth and fifth grade if they haven't learned that in third grade, or it's actually split across third and fourth grade in most states. So those are the types of things that I think we need to be having detailed conversations with our teacher leaders about, with our principals about, that how does instruction actually look when we start next year? You'll notice in reading that the slides aren't quite as great, and that's because reading builds on itself. But a student who was already struggling in reading isn't likely to have made up anything while they've been out, right? And so you've got to use all the information you have on your students as they're coming back. One of the things that that we're trying to do is make sure that there's good information in the community about what is available as students go back to school for students that need to pick up the pace, or how will we even know which students are which? So having good interim assessments is something that we think is an important part of this, but really having a plan that doesn't look like the start of school for every year feels pretty important in this moment. But again, there are others on this call that can do a better job of talking about that. So excited to hear from them.
Great, thank you. And actually, I'm seeing in the chat box, somebody is saying that our community commentator, David Moore, is doing this planning right now. So I'm very excited to hear from him later on in the conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chris. Jennifer, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, if I may. I know that you have done extensive research to understand how we can strengthen and improve summer learning programs and other out-of-school time programs to better support children. So, you know, the challenge presented by COVID-19 and the school closures associated with it is certainly unprecedented. But we've known for a long time that many children experience learning loss over the summer. So what does your research tell us about how we can address this current challenge that's larger but very similar to the challenge you've been researching for years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to start by making a point, because we're going to focus a lot naturally on academics in this conversation. But I also want to point out that during this time, like, students are missing out on academic instruction, but also on social connections to peers and teachers and other adults, and also enrichment activities. They're losing a lot during this period of time. And it's a loss for all students. However, from our prior research on summer learning loss, it's quite clear who's going to lose the most during this period of time, which is children from low-income families. So we have a number of years of research about summer learning loss. Chris has shown sort of like what can happen in terms of loss, but he's also shown that not all kids lose, right? Some kids maintain or gain over the summer. But what's consistent across all of the studies of loss over decades of research is that children from low-income families fall behind their peers in reading and mathematics, and they also have fewer opportunities for socially and emotionally enriching experiences. So addressing this inequity, which is, you know, we're used to dealing with summer learning loss, and we have some strategies set up to do that. But this is compounded during COVID-19 because these sort of like summer months are now lasting 6 months instead of 3. So we're going to need to address this inequity in a multi-pronged approach that includes the use of in-school and out-of-school time. And so I'm going to leave a little bit on David to address in-school strategies on this, which I know that the districts are currently really working on. I'm going to talk a little bit about how summer might be an opportune time to focus on and provide support to the students who need the most help. So it does enable you the opportunity to have programs that are very targeted towards the kids who need it the most. And we have a lot of research that shows that these summer programs, when targeted to student needs, they're intentionally designed, well attended, can produce positive outcomes for children. So in our study of voluntary summer learning programs that span sort of 5 weeks of time, full day of instruction and enrichment activities, we found that this produced effects in mathematics and for high attenders in reading and mathematics and social and emotional outcomes after the second summer. So they can be really effective if they are planned and implemented well. From our experience for younger students, particularly, since this is a campaign for grade level reading, I would encourage people to consider programs that combine academic and enrichment activities. So as I said, they have been proven to be effective, but they also, with the enrichment, are providing not just the critical opportunities for additional instruction for academics, but also giving kids opportunities that they might not otherwise have access to that are fun and also can improve social emotional development overall, and that kids might not also have access to. But in order for them to be effective, they really have to be well designed and well implemented. And that is a challenge to do. It takes a time, effort, and work. Key among planning for those is early planning, right? They have to be planned to starting now to think about even for summer, 2021. Thinking about how to target students, how to ensure that the curriculum is matched to those student needs, ensuring that the programs are sufficient duration. So the programs that we have found, academic programs that we found to be effective are 5 weeks long, 3 hours of academic instruction, and then plus enrichment activities on top of that. Having small class sizes has been incredibly beneficial, and it really helps teachers in particular jumpstart that year. So very often in summer programs, teachers are meeting kids for the first time. They have a very short, concentrated amount of time in order to be able to help support them. And having a smaller class size really helps motivate that and helps enables them to provide differentiated instruction and provide personal attention and form better connections to those students. And then, of course, key among all of these things are attendance. So like who benefits from these programs? It's kids who attend and attend at pretty high rates. And there are a number of things that these programs can do to boost attendance. And chief among those are providing sort of enrichment activities, having a strong, culture and positive climate where kids want to be and are having fun, really helps draw them in. Because kids do vote with their feet, even at young ages. We also know that if these are offered, there's likely to be a significant uptake for these programs. So a recent national survey of parents that the Learning Heroes recently conducted on parental response to COVID-19 found that 64% of parents surveyed favored making academic summer learning courses available to help children catch up. So I do think that there are potential demands for this, and really sort of like addressing the needs of kids during this time is going to take a coordinated approach that includes both in-school time and thinking about out-of-school time and summer.
Thanks for that. You were kind of getting into some of the ways that summer affects different children in different ways. Who is it that we need to be most worried about during this COVID closure break, during these extended closures, and what can we do to reach and support them?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about these COVID closures, so a lot of the research on summer learning loss actually focuses on sort of like these income differentials, and clearly those children are elevated risk during this time as well. We also know, and this kind of, Chris alludes to this too, during this time, who's most at risk from the lack of instruction? Because kids are also missing sort of like a whole, quarter of instruction during this year, or having sort of potentially disrupted access to that. And that's kids who are already behind, who are sort of struggling in grade level. And also similarly, children who are developing new skills or have fragile knowledge. And so I think that is some of what we're seeing in Chris's slides, where we see, particularly for reading, the biggest gap in potential for loss coming at those earlier grades, where sort of those reading skills are more developmental, they're beginning to learn them, whereas by the time kids are in 8th grade, a lot of them know how to read. They are confident readers, and that skill does not dissipate as quickly. Similarly, when Chris's slides, when he showed the big declines in mathematics, we know from just learning theory overall that anything that is procedural and isn't practiced regularly is more likely to decay more rapidly. And so those skills are very often the ones that kind of fall off. And if you are like me and have been like recently tutoring your 8th grader in mathematics and hoping to support that knowledge, you will find that sometimes if you haven't been practicing something regularly, you need to go back and look it up, make sure you're teaching it correctly, and then come back to it. So the good news is that for these skills that we might be forgetting, they are easier to pick up, right? So if you've taught them, you've sort of forgotten something, it is easier and faster to learn them. So that is good news for us as we're thinking about approaching some of these potential losses. It also signals the fact that we can be practicing, like this idea of practice during these periods of time will help kids maintain their skills. I also worry particularly during this time about kids who are homeless. So we're all being told to shelter in place. You know, districts have done a remarkable job ensuring that kids have access to the internet. They have computers at home. But some kids don't actually have homes. You know, not only do they not necessarily have, you know, safe, comfortable places to be in or quiet places to study, they actually might not have a home at all. And I think that these are kids who districts in particular are pretty worried about. And how to make those connections with them, how to keep them engaged during this period of time, and how to meet their needs. And then also there are certain children with special education needs that really require sort of in-person instruction in order to be most effective. I think districts have actually done a remarkable job providing one-on-one instruction to kids to meet their needs, but there are some needs that actually are best conducted in person. And I think increasingly we find sort of like what it is that we're easy to replace during this period of time remotely versus what really requires this sort of like one-on-one interaction and something that's happening.
So I know you've done a lot of research into summer-based learning or summer learning programs that are actually home-based as well. So what can you tell us about strategies, tools, resources, et cetera, that families could be using this summer, next school year, maybe next summer to support their children in getting back on track or not falling behind?
Sure. I'm going to just like loop back to one group that I forgot to like specifically call out. And this is a group that potentially has like this, they're covered in this like people of fragile knowledge. And those are English language learners, right? So where you really want the consistent practice in English to propel them, I think that's another group that we may be worried about during this time. But yeah, so what can we do now and what can families do? Because this is a big question. And I think that this is a time of opportunity for us all. And we are all, you know, I know that there are probably many parents. I'm one among them. And so suddenly you're like, oh, and suddenly we're all sort of like flexing our instructional muscles. I will say that sort of like at-home learning can help children and youth retain and build skills. So it definitely can help. What we know is that aiming for something consistent in pace. So your child over the summer months does not necessarily need to do 4 hours of instruction a day, right? And in fact, small bits of time we know are sort of like consistently paced are more effective than sort of like cramming everything into one period of time. So thinking about sort of like spending 30 minutes a day, sort of like reading books with your kids is much better than sitting down and spending 6 hours on Sunday. We need to make sure that they're developmentally appropriate in the activities that we're doing with them. And so, and I've heard from sort of like a lot of parents who are also saying like, does my kindergartner really need to fill out, you know, this worksheet, for instance? Like you can think about ways of making this, what are developmentally appropriate activities, what's the developmentally appropriate amount of time that you're spending with kids on things and using that. Making sure that you're scaffolding learning and checking in. So one of the things out of Jimmy Kim has some really great studies on Project Read, and he's done multiple versions of these. And these are sort of like at-home reading programs for kids where kids are getting books that are matched to their interests. So that is key among that. Is your kid interested in this book? So he's matching kids with books of interest, and then he has like multiple versions of these. And one of the things he's found is anything that is scaffolded is more effective, right? So if teachers are checking in, if they are setting the stage for how kids are supposed to be reading them, what parents are supposed to be doing, all of these things help with the effectiveness of the program. So parents can also do that, sort of like making sure that you're checking in with your kids. And then also, I would just recommend using district and school resources. I know, for instance, our district has been sending home sort of like these learning packets for our kids. They are really high quality material. They have done a really nice job. They're putting out sets of resources, and I would say instead of, you know, searching YouTube or Pinterest for these materials, I would go directly to their district experts and be getting those and using them. And then also just eventually seeking out structured programs that support the learning, the developmental needs that your own kids have, because we know that all kinds of different programs offered over the summer that are targeted to specific needs can be effective. Sarah, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, sorry. Thank you for that, Jennifer. That was a lot of wonderful information. A lot of it's relevant for me personally, and I think it's going to be a lot of good information for those who are working in communities and their own families on the call with us today. Chris Smith, I'd like to invite you to join into the conversation right now. I know that you and Jennifer McCombs were both on the research committee that produced last fall's National Academy of Sciences report, Shaping Summertime Experiences, which explored how summertime activities can affect 4 areas of well-being: academic learning, social emotional development, physical and mental health and behaviors, and safety and risk-taking and anti and pro-social behaviors. All 4 of these domains, I believe, can be affected by the current COVID crisis. So what insights and recommendations from that report can be applied to our efforts to support children and families now?
Thanks, Sarah. One of the recommendations in that report was to have an intermediary to coordinate resources across sectors. So in my answer, let me bring you into the Boston approach to summer learning and how it exemplifies at least some aspects of the conclusions and the recommendations of the National Academy's report. The way we think about achievement is that in order to get achievement, you need engagement. So engaging young people is a prerequisite for learning. And that for us necessitates a set of partnerships across the city. The reason for that is that the relationships that youth development programs have with kids is an asset in engaging them in learning. So is their content and expertise and the interests they represent, whether it's the arts, sports, entrepreneurship, social justice. They're hooks for learning that really bring kids in and engage them. And so pre-COVID, our summer learning system was not simply one run by the school system. It was one that was run in collaboration with the school system in 170 programs all across the city and beyond. So from, if you imagine the geography, from the Boston Harbor Islands to the Blue Hills, and on college campuses, at workplaces, and neighborhood nonprofits in between, we have an incredibly diverse system. And the reason that's important is A, it shows that very different kinds of groups can come together around a common goal with common measures, and then can learn what's working and what needs to be improved. So that's the value in having a system. Another attribute of having a diverse network or system of programs is that kids obviously bring very different needs, as Jen began to enumerate, and interests. And a responsive, diverse system can meet those needs and interests. So the challenge for us this summer has been, how do we pivot from a system that valued place quite a bit, helping kids develop a sense of identity and belonging in places they might not otherwise go, to one that's largely remote. But some of the principles remain the same. So I mentioned that engagement is a prerequisite to learning. The evidence of engagement is attendance. So who are kids showing up for? And Jen and I have another connection. She was one of the lead researchers on a multi-year randomized control trial with the Wallace Foundation. Boston was one of the cities studied. And what we saw that the 80% attendance threshold got results in academic subjects and also social and emotional skills. Finally, let me just say that the need for coordination across sectors in order to draw in multiple perspectives helps to leverage expertise and resources that are not necessarily available inside schools or a school district on its own. In fact, when we started this model of citywide summer learning 10 years ago, we held ourselves accountable to this. If a single entity could do this on its own, then we don't need to start a system and diversify the providers. But we realize that any one agency or sector reaches a limit. So we're better together by pulling together our resources. And finally, before we even get to academic achievement, which I know is important, and the loss that's occurring now, there are a set of skills that these programs are focused on that are related to academic success, but important in their own right. So across our network of 170 programs, you see programs focusing on a common set of skills such as critical thinking, communication, relationships, and perseverance. So those are great ways for youth development agencies to play to their strengths as part of a coordinated system with the school district. So this summer, more than ever, now that most programs are going remote, although some are looking at reopening under phase 2 of the Massachusetts guidelines and having small, safe, in-person gatherings with some of their students, we really need to play to our strengths and help to bring these incredibly enriching in-person activities to life remotely, because that is the key to attendance, which is the key to engagement, which is the key to learning.
Thank you for that. Great insights from the report, as well as kind of an understanding of what that looks like on the ground in Boston. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your organization, how Boston After School and Beyond has changed its programs and the ways that it's engaging and supporting children and families in response to the current crisis? And what do you see as maybe some challenges or opportunities over the coming months?
The role we play is to help convene programs, measure and evaluate what they do, and fundraise with them. And so that role hasn't changed. We found that since the school closures, we've spent a lot more time convening and communicating. We have a weekly call with programs. We have a weekly newsletter, neither of which we had before. If you look at the school year, you'll see on our website a page called Enrichment at Home, which documents some of the activities programs are doing as they move to remote settings. But the best thing we can do is to help leverage the expertise within the network. So we try to shine a light on effective practices that the data suggests. And in this new period where we don't have a lot to reference, we're surfacing ideas, brainstorming together, and trying to help programs get better by learning from one another. So as an example of that, one program we have makes great use of the Harvard Medical School campus. It's an incredible learning experience under normal circumstances where teenagers get to go to the Harvard Med School campus. Part of the program is diagnosing a mannequin who's shouting out symptoms, and the teenagers have to work together to document the systems, to start to formulate diagnoses on the timeline in a high pressure situation in order to figure out what's wrong with the mannequin, whose name is Stanley. They're actually bringing that program online, which enables them to have more kids involved. And an interesting development this year, they're actually partnering with Mass General Hospital to couple that program with virtual internships. So the young people will get paid and get access to learning. I'll give you one other example we're looking at as an opportunity. We've been developing this idea of a skills badge over the past several years as a way to recognize the learning that happens outside of school, whether it's after school or during the summer. We think this might be a good way to help provide young people with something to show for what they've learned and done over the summer and during school closure, something they can then use when they apply for jobs or even apply to college later on in life. So we actually have the technological infrastructure set up. It's a matter of spreading this across more programs this summer. So that may actually be an opportunity at the end of the day.
Great, thank you for that. David Moore, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, if I may. I know a lot of folks are eager to hear from you. Chris Minnich kind of set this up by introducing the ways in which many school districts are responding to the current crisis and planning for the coming year. So, you know, and I know that the schools, students and staff in Indian River County School District have been affected by the closures that have happened in the past few months and the related safety measures. What are your reflections on what you've heard so far from our presenters about the potential impact of learning loss on children, and what do you see as the potential opportunities for reaching and supporting children and their families while schools are closed and moving into the summer and during the next school year?
Absolutely. Let me start by saying good afternoon, everyone. Thank the Campaign for Grade Level Reading as well as the Learning Alliance here in Indian River County for the opportunity to connect and really learn from you guys. Great conversation, great dialogue. As a superintendent, this is hard and complex work. So we're just not planning for a return to school. We're planning for an unknown reality, because as we return to school, we're still not clear on what those conditions as it relates to CDC guidelines and social distancing will look like. So we're pursuing multiple pathways in order to ensure that we are prepared to meet whatever that reality reveals itself to be on August 10th here in our school system, to be ready to meet the needs of all learners. So we are very engaged and connected and controlling and maximizing what we can currently control. So one of the things that we've done intentionally as a system is really to focus in on development and looking at our administrators as well as teachers, very intentional over the last, since COVID really started, once we developed our instructional plan, our distance learning plan, and put that in place, really began to continue to implement and grow that plan. But then continue to keep our eyes on the future and the outcomes that we want to obtain for our children, and began to work diligently with our principals. And being a relatively new superintendent to this county, there's great opportunities to build the instructional leaders, understanding they have a deep understanding on how to look at data, disaggregate data, and evaluate and connect that data to improved instructional practice in classrooms, the instruction being delivered by teachers. So we've connected in a series of professional developments for our current principals and assistant principals. We just completed an instructional coaching academy where we are, thanks to the Learning Alliance, really expanding and ensuring that each of our schools have instructional coaches, both in the area of reading and math. So we have trained them over the course of 3 days, now going through an interview process to secure coaches 100% of the time spent in schools, 80% of their time in direct support, building teacher capacity at school sites. Also looking at what we're doing over the summer. So we're pulling together all of our teacher leaders with our principals, with our assistant principals, really looking at what is our new reality and how we prepare to bring our students back and to ensure that we begin teaching and learning on day one. So a series of developments over the summer, really looking at how we're going to pull students back and get down to the work of teaching and learning as quickly as possible. We'll be bringing our students back, providing multiple opportunities prior to the start of school to come in and reestablish those routines and systems that kids really haven't been exposed to since March in our situation. Also collecting some data on them and beginning interventions as soon as we begin school. So really continuing to develop, looking at differentiated instruction for our teachers, ensuring that we have the systems to ensure that grade standards are being covered, while at the same time the ability to differentiate that instruction to meet the needs of all students, on that first day. We'll be revamping our extended learning opportunities. So as mentioned on this call, opportunities really just not to maximize every minute we have to make up for the gap that we are created or COVID-19 has created. Overhauling before school, after school, during lunch, intervention programs, and really putting staff around that from a district perspective to work with each principal, really to create a space that is enriching while at the same time addressing the defined academic deficiencies. Our summer programming. So we were a district that pushed out devices very early on in the process. We told our families, keep those devices at home. We've pushed out a enrichment opportunity virtually that is very competitive and fun, allowing students to compete with, students from schools to schools to compete with one another, really to continue to grow or reduce that slide over the summer, really looking at very specific opportunities for targeted students, small teacher to student ratios in a virtual reality, going and connecting with those students over the course of the summer. So really being intentional of meeting the defined needs of students over the course of summer, even though it be in a virtual reality, has been some of the work that we continue to do. Getting students assessed, getting them clearly defining where we're going to be, looking forward to getting students back to a regular reality, and doing everything that we can on the front end to ensure that we're building teacher capacity. We understand where those defined deficiencies are. And as we bring them back, we have a clearly defined plan to maximize the amount of time that we have. Creating additional time is not going to be too realistic. Providing additional days on the front end, not going to be realistic. There are financial impediments that will stand in our way, not only this year, but in the years to follow. So our plan has really been, with the defined days that we have, how do we maximize those days and the time within those days really to accelerate outcomes for kids? So COVID-19 will not be used as an excuse in the school district of Indian River County, but just another barrier that we will problem solve and find solutions to.
Great, thank you for that. It seems like you've been incredibly busy, and your district and district leaders and educators have been really doing a lot of different things to make sure that they are reaching and supporting and ready for whatever comes in the fall. Thank you for that on-the-ground perspective.
Absolutely.
Before we transition into Q&A, I'd like to bring all four of our panelists together into a conversation to reflect on one final question, each of you. I know this is an evolving crisis, and we're still in the relatively early stages of it right now in terms of our response. But have you seen any exciting or innovative responses from states or districts with regards to whether it's effective online learning in the early grades or addressing basic necessities while also supporting social emotional learning and development in addition to educational achievement? And maybe I thought we could go through the same order that we use for our presentation. So maybe starting with you, Chris Minnich, what are you seeing in the districts and states that you're working with? I think you said you're working with 10,000 school districts right now. So what are you seeing that's providing you with hope in this moment in that work with them?
Yeah, I mean, we're in about one in every four districts in the country. So a lot going on and a lot of good stuff. The superintendent's presentation was quite inspiring to me because there's leader after leader that I see just sort of saying, we're not going to make excuses. We're going to go get it done for kids. And so that's the first thing I see pretty consistently across the country is that that there are various limitations, like the superintendent talked about. Hey, I can't start early because I got budget limitations there, but I am going to do these other things. That's exactly what I'm seeing from superintendents all across the country. I will say one of the common threads for me is many school districts are not stopping in June. They're saying we're going to either leave the technology with parents that we have already sent out, or we are going to find ways, whether it be libraries or summer interactions, in some way to keep learning going. So I'm just mostly excited about A, the leadership stance that leaders are taking, but B, that the summer learning piece is more serious than I've ever seen it be for the districts we're engaged in. So those are two things I'm seeing.
Thank you. What about you, Jennifer McCombs? What are you seeing in terms of efforts to support children during the summer and make sure that they're not falling behind? Oh,
and one is just the responsiveness of districts. Like you've just seen them not only just focus on the academic needs, but ensuring that kids have access to food, technology, and then really what I've seen throughout all the districts I've worked with is a focus on ensuring equitable access to education and that being a priority. In terms of, and then I think we're also seeing a lot of innovation, right? It's forcing all of us in many different ways to try new things, some of which we're going to find are really helpful and have sort of like long-lasting power. So for instance, I know that Pittsburgh is currently thinking about having an online summer program that also includes enrichment activities and trying to deliver all of that, their summer learning program online. And the extent to which that we are able to figure out effective ways of using technology for a variety of things, not just academics, but also enrichment, all of that learning has a lot of power, not just in this moment of COVID-19 when all of us are sort of home or trying to physically distance, but also for thinking about rural communities. So rural communities have a lot less access to a variety of things, instruction in terms of enrichment activities, et cetera. So anything we learn about how to deliver things virtually has these huge implications for how we can better serve students in more rural areas, throughout the next decade.
Thank you. And now coming to you, Chris Smith, what are you seeing in Boston and the surrounding areas that's providing you with some hope or some innovative responses that you'd like to share?
I think the silver lining in this, to agree with Chris and Jen, is a focus on summer. All eyes are on summer like never before. But I've been incredibly impressed with the creativity and the persistence of programs who have reinvented themselves with no warning to distribute food, Chromebooks, and partner in new and different ways. And I think we've all developed this new muscle around working remotely and using technology. And that's a skill that young people are developing too. So while it's not as good as the real thing about being together, this is undoubtedly a skill they're going to need to use in the future. So I think that's some of the silver lining in this. And I think programs are going to be stronger for this.
Thank you. So now coming back to you, and I'll just say, Chris, that my third grader is helping me sometimes with Zoom. So I do definitely think our children are learning a lot of technology as well as the adults who are dealing with this transition. But coming back to you again, David Moore, you shared a lot about what your district is doing to reach, support, educate children in your community and to prepare for what's coming and to not make any excuses, do whatever you can given the realities that you're facing. Can you tell us a little bit more maybe about that, or also any innovations that you've seen in other communities that you're thinking about or exploring the potential of bringing to your community and replicating in Indian River?
Yeah, there's a lot we want to replicate going into what would be my first full school year next year, really leveraging some of this, this crisis. You never miss a good opportunity, or you never let a crisis go by without, finding some opportunities to shift and change behavior. And I think that's one of the things we have truly realized as a system, or as a systems perspective, our ability to really look at complex problems that haven't been displayed or defined in previous years and address those problems, find solutions, be creative, and pull ourselves together to really eliminate or significantly reduce some barriers really is a systems change in terms of our ability to problem solve, and leveraging some of that new understanding going into a new school year really is an opportunity for all of us really to say, despite how hard and challenging this new way of learning would be, or this new challenge or obstacle, whatever it may be, we know we could think differently in order to solve that particular problem. The resiliency of team members and staff and teachers really has been something that has been rewarding to be a part of. I think the parents' understanding of both the struggles as well as the reality in which teachers face, I think parents now have a deeper understanding as what it means really to move a student forward and ensure that they're at or beyond the standards level now more than ever. And that is once again is another opportunity for us to leverage their understanding to move students forward.
Great point, great point. Well, so we've been getting a number of questions posed in the Q&A box, and I'd encourage those of you who are joining in on the webinar with us right now to continue posing some questions that you'd like to ask of our presenters. I was thinking maybe we could start with a couple of clarifying questions kind of for you, Jennifer, in terms of the research that you've done around effective summer programs, you know, in small class size. What does that look like? And also, you know, attendance rates are important for it to have an impact and be beneficial to the child. What kind of attendance rates do we need in order to see a benefit?
Yeah, so very good clarified questions. And so small class size, as defined in our study, of 15 students or fewer per class. So those were smaller than what teachers typically have during the school year. And it actually is cited as one of the benefits of working in summer programs by teachers, is how much more they could do with students having a smaller group of students in that class. And in terms of attendance, we found sort of like this idea, it's not like kids don't benefit. We're, the most significant benefits were for children who attended at least 20 days. And so this leads us to the recommendation of having a 5-week program, because kids don't attend every single day of a summer program. Average daily attendance rates were around 75%. And so, you know, having a 5-week program at a minimum sort of maximizes the potential that you are going to get those 20 days of attendance out of an individual.
Great, thank you. Chris Smith, I have a question for you in terms of the work in Boston. Martha Dippenbrock was asking a little bit about the badging platform. Is that something that you developed, or is it something that was already existing that you brought to your community? She sees the opportunity to engage more young people in what is previously limited, something that can carry forward in developing hybrid programs. So could you tell us a little bit more about the badging platform that you use that you were discussing?
Yes, it reflects a focus we already had on building skills. We had actually measured both skill development by observing them in kids, and also measure the program practices associated with those skills. So it builds on years of working with programs on how to do that. But the technology platform we use is from a group called For All Rubrics, which might be For All Badges at this point. It's changed its name, but For All is the beginning part of the name. But the key we learned is that you know, it'd be easy just to say, we're gonna have young people in the program, they're gonna get along, they're gonna do great things. That would be adequate. But in order to develop a skill, you've gotta be a lot more intentional. And Jen referenced this in the research on summer learning. You really have to think, how are you gonna call upon that skill? How will young people have opportunities to demonstrate that skill? So the steps in the platform are basically for young people to set a goal, to do some research, to find an area of interest, at some point to reflect with others and to present. And so the other thing we came up with, it's not part of a platform, is the criteria on which you base the badge. And we had based it on attendance and an observation score of skills, but you could look at any, you could look at a different sort of rubric in order to come up with criteria to confer a badge. You could confer a badge to everyone in a certain type of program. So you could cut it in a lot of different ways. The platform we use is for all badges.
Great, thank you. And just as a reminder, we will be including links to resources and things that are shared during today's conversation. So I'll make sure to figure out if it's for all rubrics or for all badges and include a link to that in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out later on this week. One question that we had from Maria O'Brien is wondering about what measures are in place to address the social, emotional, and mental health that children are experiencing, or mental health issues and challenges children are experiencing right now, and to help them through the trauma of COVID-19. And as Chris Minnich was also referencing, the additional traumas that we're dealing with across the nation right now with racial justice and social justice issues that children are seeing. And so I think maybe we could start with you, David, kind of for that on-the-ground perspective about what measures are in place to address social, emotional, and mental health. And what are you doing to support children in that area right now in Indian River County?
Absolutely. And we continue to monitor. One of the things that we did at the onset, all of our school counselors, social workers, mental health specialists continue to provide that services to their students just as if school was in session. So ensuring that we weren't breaking down those systems of support, but being very intentional in order to continue to have those individual counseling sessions, those group sessions, and establishing systems where if a teacher was concerned because they weren't hearing from a student, or a student's level of engagement on the platforms was not successful, that we were able to connect our counselors to those individual students. Same thing goes into summer, continuing those relationships and those interactions as we begin to get back to normal, having that our coaches, our Little Leagues, being very intentional with those who have solid relationships. If they see concerns, to let us know. Community partnerships in this community is one of the best things about it. So leveraging those relationships and their understanding of where our children is something we've really been intentional about. And then as we return to school, I mentioned we're coming in, bringing them back to reconnect to these structures and systems, but really kind of almost doing a thematic approach where we're looking at the appropriate social, emotional characteristics, behaviors, values that we need to kind of incorporate in over the course of the first few weeks. So we want to get down to teaching and learning, as I said earlier, as quickly as possible. But that really is secondary to a student feeling safe, feeling comfortable, and knowing that they're nurtured and cared for. So we're really being intentional over the course of that first couple weeks of looking at students, providing programming and instruction for them, really to reintroduce them not only to the structures and systems, but address the social emotional learning. So really being at the forefront and front loading some of that support will ensure that we find success moving forward.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to jump in on that?
I know of some measures. There are surveys and things like that that we're being asked to administer along with the academic. I could, one of them is probably the most well-known is called Panorama, social emotional survey. But I think it's less about the surveys and more about doing the work, I think, because the work is about engaging with students deeply about how they're processing this. And for me, it might be nice to know on a survey how kids are feeling, but frankly, I think having a conversation with the student will give you a better idea than a survey will. So that's my perspective, an individual perspective on it. So.
Jennifer or Chris Smith, anything that you'd like to add?
The only thing I have to add is not so much around the measurement, but sort of like what you do for students. And I do know that districts are also looking for boosting like the number of counselors and mental health workers that are available in their schools, and also increasing the number of partnerships with community partners that can provide these types of services to students during this time.
I'll just add quickly the 3 levels at which we measure social and emotional skills under normal circumstances. One is observing young people. We use the Massachusetts SEO tool for that from a group called NIOST, also in Massachusetts. For kids 4th grade and up, we do a self-assessment using the PAIR holistic student assessment. So young people will talk about their own strengths and needs. And then as part of a Wallace Foundation pilot on social emotional learning, we're looking at a performance-based assessment called CellWeb. But I would agree with everyone before, David, Chris, and Jen, who said it's what you do with it. We do think those are good measures to get school and their out of school time program partners to meet in the middle, and they're excellent handles for engaging with kids beyond test scores or school attendance reports.
Before we move on to the next question, I just want to let everybody know I'm about to launch the poll that I mentioned at the beginning, at the top of the webinar. So we'll continue the conversation, but just wanted to let you know and encourage you, as you have a moment, to share your thoughts and feedback on the poll. We'll leave it open until the close, but just wanted to let you know about that. Sorry. And then now coming back to you, Chris Minnich, somebody was asking, and staying with this conversation around assessments and measurement and understanding where children are, how they're doing. Are any school districts administering the MAP assessments remotely in this moment where we're not able to do in-school assessments?
Yeah, we do have some districts that are. We initially recommended not to assess because the transition to online learning was what should be focused on. We were in a moment where there was uncertainty, but we've now gone back to a lot of our partners and said, yeah, we think it's okay to assess remotely, especially since they've been out for such a long period. You want another checkpoint, maybe even leading into summer. Some of our assessments actually give recommendations about what to do next with a student. So that's actually what the district is doing, is they're saying, let's take this assessment now and give parents something to work on over the summer. So that is something that's happening in some school districts. Others are going to wait till the fall and then assess as they come back in September. So there's kind of 2 use cases. One is assess now and use the summer, and then maybe assess again at the end of the summer. You know, our initial recommendation was not to focus on testing because there were other things that were much more important, like getting technology, getting food to kids, making sure they're well. But we've reached a point in this process where we think academic data is really important. So we're now recommending that districts that work with us could use those assessments now.
So a follow-up question that could go to any of you on that. So maybe once assessments are done, or as parents realize that their children are performing below grade level or not staying on track, whether it's through an assessment or just through kind of their recognition and watching their child struggle with something, you know, what are some ways to support parents? What are some resources that are available to help them as they are trying to help their child catch up or not fall farther behind? And how can we support teachers to have those tough conversations with families and supporting them?
You know, on the resource front, you know, we link our assessments with several curriculum intervention type of things, but the free stuff out there, that's pretty good. I mean, somebody mentioned some of the PBS stuff that's available. I would look at things like the Khan Academy. That's in mathematics, not ELA. But the most important thing is figuring out how do you get kids into texts that challenge them. that are not so easy that they're just learning the same words over and over again, but that the texts are challenging to them. And so giving parents advice about reading levels and how to make sure that you're pushing your students to the right level and not just letting them read it and stay at the current level because they're enjoying reading that at that level is something that's hard. But we use things like Lexiles and other things to do that in our recommendations. So I guess I would say getting books in the hands of students, and then on the mathematics side, something free like Khan Academy is quite a good resource for helping kids stay up to grade level.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
And then I was just going to kind of build upon it, is being very intentional with our time. So some of our development over the summer really has been really looking at the resources that we're currently providing to students and making sure all instructional staff understand what is the intent, what is the appropriate use, is it at grade level, is it meeting the defined efficiency, and really moving away from a homework structure, but to home learning and reinforcing what's being done at home. If we've learned anything in this time is that parents have a better understanding as to what we're asking children to do in our schools, because school has been in the home, and really, and say, this is not a time waster. We've lost so much time in the last, what will be 6 months. We want to be extremely intentional. So building relationships with parents, keeping the partnerships that we really have created. If we don't leverage those partnerships between teachers and parents, it's at an all-time high right now, then we've really lost a very meaningful time in the history of education. Those relationships are stronger and they're more connected now than they've ever been. And we've established that expectation or that relationship. So as we move into a new school year, we need to reconnect and establish those new relationships at the same level with the parents that we'll be serving next year as we greet our new students into our new classrooms.
Continuing the conversation around parents, we've had somebody ask a question in particular for you, Jennifer, about recognizing the importance of having an amount of time during the day that's focused on learning during summer programs to make sure that children are staying on track that way. But if it's going to be at home, and for this person saying 3 hours of Zoom feels like a lot. During the summer break, and then somebody else is asking a question about, how much is appropriate to, ask parents to do over the summer, hearing from the families that she serves that so many parents are feeling burnt out from, kind of doing this juggling dance that many of us are doing in terms of supporting children's learning and doing everything else and dealing with, our own, the stresses that everyone is facing. So what would be your response to that, Jennifer?
Yeah,
and anyone else?
So I would say that the 3 hours of instruction in the kind of split between reading and math that comes from the study is for it's not an at-home program. So this is a program that operates somewhere outside of your home and has a teacher, right? And so, and I even think that even going into an online format, sort of like when you're teaching, it often pushes you to think sort of like, what is the lesson and how long is it that we can actually engage, right? And to be thinking about that, because as I'm sure that people like even now are kind of like a little bit antsy, and we're all adults and interested in what we're doing, hopefully. So yes, like 3 hours on Zoom constant, I would never recommend that for a child, especially a young child, right? It's just going to be too much. And so I would think about, if I were like thinking about this from a school perspective and trying to target specific kids, I would really get down to what David was recommending and being really intentional about what individual kids' needs are. Like, what is it that they need to learn most? And think about potentially pushing lessons that are more differentiated to them so that they can be actually shorter in duration. Now, if you were a parent, which I am one, and I will say that even with, my interest in education, my devotion to it, my ability to do what my kids need on every single given day fluctuates. Like, quite frankly, like, there was a period of time when I was working 15 hours a day. Like, I did not support the learning of my child that week. Like, it just was what it was and go. So I would say for parents, like, we all need to really think about what is realistic to us. Also think about the supports that you have around you, right? So it, particularly for young kids, like, think about, like, do you have an aunt? Do you have a grandmother? Like, do you have a parent who would want to Zoom and read to your kid, right? It doesn't always have to be the parent. So I would encourage us to think about what are extended networks and how we can utilize them. So I, for one, know that my mother would love to talk to my children at any given time. Like, potentially I should be sort of like using that as a resource. And somebody else suggested me getting my high school kid to help with my younger one, right? What is that another resource that where she could have like a job tutoring, right? And I would think about sort of also like authentic things that you want to do. So there are some things that are going to be sort of like continuing to practice like some basic skills in mathematics, but then there can also be some fun things that are actually really fun for you and your child, reading a book together, you know, or sort of like when they're older, having a book club and then discussing it. And trying to think about different ways to be creative so that it doesn't feel like 3 hours of instruction for you all summer long as well.
Very important. Anybody else want to add to that? Or
David, do you want to tell me I was wrong?
No, I'm sitting here shaking my head the whole time. So no, I think.
So David, actually, while I've got you, I got a comment from somebody. You were talking about how, you know, parents, and, you know, I can say that this is true of myself, have a deeper appreciation and understanding, respect for the amazing work that the teachers who are serving our children are doing. Have you heard from your teachers, the educators on your team, that they have a deeper respect or understanding for what the role that parents are playing in this moment as well? Have you heard that?
I think we've heard that on both sides. I think that relationship is stronger, as I said earlier, than it has ever been. And it's our responsibility to leverage that understanding on both sides. And I think some of the, you know, as we continue to do our enrichment programs as well as our remediation programs, parents have seen what it is that we're given. And it's really at the onset pushed our teachers to say, you know, I just can't be the giver and collector of work. I have to ensure that this passes the mustard, because parents are going to be the ones who absolutely see it. So what could have been this low level, low expectation assignment, we've had to challenge ourselves to say, A, we just shouldn't be about that to begin with, but B, let's make sure it is something that we could be proud of at all levels. So really teaching our class as if the whole world is watching really has enhanced our ability to provide more meaningful, rigorous instruction for our students, while at the same time being creative on how we're going to support that higher expectation of instructional delivery in this new format.
Thank you. We've had some people ask for links to the social emotional measures and assessments that were referenced earlier. So I just want to let you know that I'll follow up with our panelists and get those links and include them in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out later this week. So keep an eye out for that. We've had somebody ask about examples of ways that schools and summer programs can better communicate with youth during this time and support them. And also, you know, we've mentioned a number of different resources that are available online, and also talked about the ways that schools and school districts have been working to address the digital divide in this moment by providing devices. But what about the families that either don't have devices, don't have sufficient number of devices, even if they've been given some, and or don't have access to internet to really leverage and utilize those devices to support their children's learning and development. Any kind of thoughts on that, or ways to get beyond the digital innovative ways that we're delivering resources through other ways?
Well, so I do know that, so one thing that districts have done, and in addition to providing laptops, is to ensure that those actually can access the internet, even if somebody does not have internet access at home. So I do think that districts have done a lot on this end to ensure that people, if given a device, will be able to access materials. But the other thing that I've seen people do is, like, I get sent learning packets, like hard copies. And I think the districts have also been doing that because they do understand that not everybody will necessarily have access at the exact same time. And so thinking about those other ways of like using paper and books and things like that, and not just, not just using Zoom, but also using telephones. And I think that teachers are really doing this, like thinking about how it is that they can best access and communicate with parents and students.
I would just add to that, a lot of our summer programs are dropping off kits, and they'll look different depending on the content of the program. So it might be a hands-on science kit. For the kids who are in City Sprouts gardening, it's a gardening kit. For Harlem lacrosse, well, they have lacrosse sticks and balls. So the idea is to prompt learning online, but not do it all online. And the way we're framing that is that it's skills-focused, project-based learning, not necessarily online, but remote in most cases.
Thank you. Any other comments on that question?
You know, there is, I was trying to Google, I saw a summer camp come through that was on, they called it a summer camp, but it was a virtual summer camp, and it was run by, I forget the name of the organization. So I will get it to you so that we can send it out. I can't get it off the top of my head. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, so we'll include that in the email that goes out. Could you explain a little bit more about how you do the kits? We had a follow-up question on that.
How they're assembled? Well, each program has taken responsibility for assembling its kits. You know, that's presented the challenge as a place where a lot of people can get together in a safe, distant environment where they can put them together. But I think some of the ideas are, Boston set up food and Chromebook distribution sites. So one idea is to use those to hand out kits. A lot of door-to-door delivery of kits themselves. And so I don't think any two look the same. They depend on what the focus of the program itself is. Okay. But like Jen said, they're meant to be tangible representations of the program, so it's not all through a screen.
All right, well, we are rapidly approaching the end of our 90 minutes together. So just before we close, I'd like to encourage those who have not yet had a chance to do so to take a quick moment to share your thoughts and feedback on today's conversation using the poll that should still be on your screen. Again, we really do welcome your feedback and thoughts on these conversations. And then I'd just like to say a huge, deep, heartfelt thank you to our Rockstar panel for joining us and sharing these wonderful insights and research with us today. Thank you to Chris Minnich, to Jennifer McCombs, to Chris Smith, and to David Moore for joining us and sharing all of this great information. And I want to thank all of you who joined in as participants on the conversation, sharing your thoughts and feedback in the chat box and great questions in the Q&A box. Just a quick reminder that there's, if we could go to the next slide, we've got a number of additional great GLR Learning Tuesdays conversations planned for the coming months, for the coming weeks. This month, and we'll continue the conversation around the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge throughout the month of June. So I hope you'll be able to join in for more of those online learning conversations with us. But until then, be well, stay safe, and take care. Thank you so much again to our panelists and to all of you for joining in.